Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 9th of June 2017, and here we are post-election. Parliament, Mike.
Well, it is a hung parliament, as most people will know by now, and I'm quite sure many people would prefer it to be this type than the type we've got, but nonetheless, that's what we have. Brian?
Well, I think a lot of people are thinking there's got to be some major changes because we're just seeing the rhetoric bounce back and forth from the parties. But did people make a difference in their vote? I think they did. And the fact that many people got out there and voted for at least one candidate has given us this unique opportunity that we've got some time to try and sort out what's happening in the country. So just as an example of that, let's just go to local MP. Well, he was Oliver Colville. Remember what this man was doing while Britain and the US were bombing Syria to pieces? That wasn't a problem for him. People sleeping on the streets wasn't a problem. Nothing was a problem apart from hedgehogs. Very nice little creatures. A lot of sympathy for hedgehogs. But he's paid the price because last night Oliver Colville is out and Labour's Luke Pollard is in. So we want to say to Luke Pollard, congratulations. And now you have a real opportunity to make a difference on important issues. But the other thing, of course, we'll just remind people is that armed police at these elections, at the count. And so this is the face of Britain, McDonald's baseball capped police with automatic weapons. No vote in Parliament on this, simply brought in by an unknown group of people, including Theresa May, behind closed doors. So police state Britain, Mike.
And even outside Jeremy Corbyn's house, the Evening Standard here pushing this image out. So two armed policemen outside Jeremy Corbyn's house. It's a nice house.
Well, he lives where he lives, but is Jeremy Corbyn really suddenly targeted by Al-Qaeda, Daesh, ISIS, Al-Nusra, Islamic State?
I think we might be coming on to that a little later.
Okay. Well, we got a clue as to what was happening from the good old BBC. So this was the run-up, a beginner's guide to election night, 9 things to watch out for. And I found the image very, very interesting. It reminded me of some form of worship. So we've labelled this Enter the Cult of Chaos worship. And more on that in due course. But many of the papers talking about chaos, this is not accidental, and we're going to explain exactly what's going on here. Who's to blame?
Well, now many people saying that we, have a direct line to Russia, being supported by Russia Today. So you'll be glad to know that we did get a quote from Vladimir Putin on this. He said, "Brexit and turmoil, our master plan is nearly complete."
Yeah.
So there you go. That's straight.
So it presumably has been confirmed that that Russia was behind this election result.
Well, not in the mainstream media just yet, but we're expecting it any moment.
Okay, that'll be good.
So let's look at the result, and there it is. The Tories, whatever they got, 322 seats or whatever it was, not enough to make a majority, an outright majority. So we understand now that they are talking about perhaps forming a coalition with the DUP, but we'll cover what options they have a little bit later in the programme. The Labour Party, the Tories lost, I believe, 12 seats. The Labour Party gained 22 or so. SNP, well, perhaps we could bring David Scott in a second and we could discuss the SNP. The Liberal Democrats didn't do very well. The DUP and Sinn Féin, well, we'll talk about them in a minute as well. Theresa May didn't look very happy in the various photographs that were going around.
So she originally said she wasn't going to call a snap election. Then she said she needed to call a snap election in order to consolidate the power of the Tory party and help us out of Brexit, help us with Brexit. She calls the election and then she ends up in a weaker position than when she started.
Now, during the week, Ian Crane suggested that perhaps Theresa May would not survive this election, win or lose. Well, at the moment, she seems to be determined to stick around for a little bit longer, but we'll see. This sounds a bit like the I will not resign, I will not resign, I will not resign, I resign rhetoric that we normally get from politicians. Amber Rudd was on Ian Crane's mind as perhaps a replacement. Well, she came very close to not even achieving her seat. And the Evening Standard here showing a little bit of video of her being interviewed just before the count, and she was very nervous.
Very nervous. I think people have seen through this woman because, of course, as Home Secretary, she's been disastrous. She has a role in the incarceration of child abuse survivors, such as Melanie Shaw, alongside Theresa May, of course. But I think people have looked at this woman and said, what has she got to offer? And I don't think it's much.
Absolutely, absolutely. And who else? Who lost their seats? Well, Nick Clegg, he'll just get bumped up to the Lords, so he's probably not going to be too upset about that. But David, let's bring you in at this point, because two of the key scalps here were Angus Robertson, who was the leader of the SNP in the House of Commons, and Alex Salmond, a former leader of the SNP of the entire party, and certainly an elder statesman of the party, perhaps.
Well, it was quite a night in Scotland. There was much celebration in the majority of the land, which didn't like what the SNP had been doing to the country. And we see we've passed what's been termed peak nationalist. So Alex Salmond wrote a book called The Dream Will Never Die. Well, it's not looking too healthy tonight. And Angus Robertson means that we will have to get by without hearing the same question asked at PMQs every week. So there's much joy. There's much singing and dancing in the streets of most of Scotland about this, and we see that the nationalists have taken a very big step backwards. They of course don't admit this. Nicola Sturgeon is saying, "Well, we won the election. This is the second best result we've ever had. Haven't we done well?" And here you see her as Comical Ali from of Iraq War fame. But what they did is they went back from nearly 50% of the vote to 38%, so 12%. One in every 8 Scottish voters changed from SNP to somebody else, mostly to the Conservatives. They lost, getting on for 40% of the seats. They're down from 56 to 35, 21 seats gone. Many of the ones they held by a fingernail. There was one in North East Fife, 2 votes. The constituency here, Pete Wishart's constituency in Perthshire, 22 votes, I think it was, or 27 votes. It wasn't really many. And there was quite a few that came down to a few hundred votes one way or another, or less than 100 votes. So a lot of the people were quite close. It could have been much worse for them. So what we see here is a uniquely Scottish angle on this. The election in Scotland was about the Union. It seems that all elections in Scotland now are about the Union.
So this tweet here, the text has been, the True Patriot has put a little bit of irony at the top. This increased reduced majority gives me another cast iron minority mandate for Indy Ref 2. and this was the unique feature of the Scottish election, because the reason that the Tories did quite well in Scotland was that they focused on independence, and this was something that the SNP did not want to do.
Well, the SNP created it by announcing the second independence referendum and by beating the drums for the second go at an Indy Ref within a few years, not a once in a generation event. And of course, without having answered any of the questions, without any of the intellectual work having been done. So there was no constitution, there was no currency, there was no solution to the banking problem, there was no solution to the £15 billion black hole in Scottish government finances. None of this, just, paint yourself blue and feel excited. And it didn't work. So that was what the Scottish election was about. It was about maintaining Great Britain, the United Kingdom as a country, and not going down the route of what is termed Scottish nationalism, but is of course very pro-EU, very internationalist, but very, very anti-British.
David, if I may, I just wanted to say thank you to a gentleman called Derek who called me fairly early this morning from Scotland to say that he had discovered the UK column in November last year. He said, I've been watching all of the reports and the news and the work, and I want to say thank you very much. He said, I particularly wanted to thank you for the guidance you've given as to what's really been going on, and it made a difference in how I voted in Scotland. So that was a really wonderful phone call to come in early this morning. Interesting times. We're clearly beginning to we're able to communicate now with viewers and listeners about what's really going on in this country, and that feedback, wonderful. My question to you is, do you think the named person scheme and all the work that you and many others did to highlight the dangers of the named persons scheme in Scotland, do you think that this provided at least some of the backlash, as it were, on SNP?
Very interesting you raised that, because we've not discussed this, but I think that was the defining point when the tide turned on the SNP, when the shine started to come off what they were selling. People started to realise what they were really like. The totalitarian tendencies started to show. I remember when it was first questioned in the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood, there was a look that went along the SNP front bench of incredulity that anyone was actually opposing them, that anyone was actually calling them on this. They felt confident that the social justice narrative that they'd bought into would carry all before it. And that was the first time that an idea of individual liberty actually raised its head and pushed back. So yes, I think named person was the start of what you're now seeing unraveling for the SNP.
And having said that, I think we must add to that, this again shows that when people take simple actions to challenge the state, to challenge the political representatives, when people do quite simple things in numbers, they can make a difference. And I think this has got to be the message from here on. Many people saying, yes, but what do we do now? Well, it seems to me this election has bought us time. Things are still very dangerous, but we're now beginning to see what happens when many people take simple actions in a measured, calm, measured way. They can achieve a difference and make a different result.
Well, that's Scotland. Let's have a look at Northern Ireland. And the picture quite spectacular because, well, if we give a little bit of background to this, of course, over the last several months, possibly up to a year, there has been quite a bit of rhetoric in the press about what's going to happen to Ireland and to Northern Ireland as a result of Brexit. Are we going to go back to having a hard border between, well, in fact, there never really was a hard border because there was already an agreement between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland before the European Union came on the scene. And so what was going to happen here? So this is kind of causing division and pushing people towards the extremes. So here we have now two colours only, with the exception of one constituency in North Down, at the top of the north of the Arts Peninsula. There we've got two colours: the DUP in the north and the east, and Sinn Féin in the south and the west, with the exception of West Belfast, which is Sinn Féin. So the DUP takes 10 seats. Sinn Féin, I think it's 7. And one independent constituency, but really the Ulster Unionist Party, the Alliance Party, the SDLP, the smaller parties completely locked out of this election as people have moved to the extremes in order to, being driven by, amongst other things, the whole rhetoric over Brexit. So this is pretty spectacular. Now what it does is it gives 10 seats to the Democratic Unionist Party, and as we've said, Theresa May talking about possibly forming a coalition with them, or at least she's
that's
now
been agreed, Mike.
Well, I think they haven't quite agreed it.
Okay.
So anyway, we'll keep an eye on that. I could be wrong about that, but that's where we are, and not the best situation, David. Really, as opinions move to the opposite poles.
And to some extent, we saw the same in England, because the smaller parties got squeezed again, and it became much more of a two-party runoff. The Conservative vote was relatively high, and on a similar percentage of the vote, Tony Blair had won one of his landslides. But that's when the opposition was split between many other parties. and with the way the first past the post system operates, all the seats came in barrel loads to, in that case, the Labour Party. Here it didn't happen because we're back to a two-party system. UKIP has disappeared, and the views that it represented, which were clearly very popular, clearly represented a lot of people. Who's representing those people now? I'm not actually very sure. And the Liberal Democrats are becalmed, so we're back to two-party rule.
Some good points in there, but David, and we looked at a little bit of analysis. I think that in total UKIP had 500, I think it was 593,000 votes. So just to give an idea of the scale of it, let's remember the 17 million who voted for Brexit. Where do those people stand now? But I'm just going to pick up on a comment in the chat box. Somebody has said, well, I'm a bit puzzled because we've now got a bad situation and the UK columns seem to be supporting it. What we said before the election was we needed to buy time, because if Theresa May had established a working or substantial majority, she would have run in the dictatorship, the Tory coup as we called it, in no time at all. What we've now got is a fractious situation, so it's chaotic. I'm just going to come on to that, but what this has bought is time for people to really see through what's going on and to start taking more action. So we don't think that the result is a solution. We simply think that the present political situation buys the wider population time to do the right things to start to get some proper solutions. So let's have a look at this, because we can maybe explain a few things. I just picked up this as a sub-headline within an article written by the Daily Telegraph, and it was Citibank predicts May will resign. Well, that simple headline raises all sorts of issues. How would they know? Well, I think they would know because, of course, ultimately they are controlling the politicians. And David, you'll have a chance in a minute to come back on that if you agree or disagree. But what an interesting little headline that we don't know what's going on. We don't know whether May's going to resign or not, but Citibank is pretty confident that May is going to go. And I think they're right. Why? Because they're one of the banks controlling her. This was the article, and the Telegraph here saying that Britain has voted for chaos. This is not a little accidental article. If you get into it, there's key articles here. We've got Britain votes for chaos, latest, and over here, coalition chaos, what happens next? So as we look through, the word chaos is cropping up more and more. Is this some sort of coincidence or accident? Well, I don't think so. And if we want to understand why, we need to go back to quotes that were made several years ago. This was Nicholas Bowles MP, quoted in The Guardian and elsewhere. And his quote was, "The Prime Minister and his deputy Nick Clegg want their people power revolution to unleash chaotic effects across local communities. Chaotic, therefore, in our vocabulary, is a good thing." So here was a man, he didn't really realise the seriousness of the information he was leaking, but here we were getting 2 or 3 years ago an insight into what the Tories were ultimately planning, and it was chaos. And if you think that was just one quote, well, then we had Cameron's ally and one-time advisor Danny Kruger. He was actually forced to resign as a Tory candidate for blabbing because he said the Conservatives plan to introduce a period of creative destruction in the public services. So this is not accidental at all. And if we've got two men who are telling the truth about what's going on, just start to get an insight into the mentality of people inside politics. So here's Eric Pickles, described in the Telegraph as a pink geisha. He says most people in politics are transactional. You do this and I'll get that. Theresa May is not like that at all. She's the worst person in the world to do a deal because she will do things on merit. Well, what an amazing statement, Mike, that a criticism of Theresa May is that she evaluates things, decides on their merit what's the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do, presumably what's good and bad. But Eric Pickles sees this as a danger. David, these people are beginning to give themselves away, their policies increasingly hidden in plain sight.
They are, or perhaps we're only starting to see what's actually going on here, because we have, I mean, creative destruction. So let's start there. Creative destruction, to make it as positive as possible, may refer to the fact that there are we're reaching the end of the post-war welfareism, post-World War II settlement. Right? It's unaffordable. The government finances everywhere are awash with red ink, and ultimately it can't go on. That's before you start factoring in aging populations and underclass and all the other problems that it's facing. But it's not a mature conversation with an electorate to say, here are the nature of the nation's finances, here are the hard decisions that have to be made, here's what we think and why. No, what we're going to do is destroy something and have, out of the disaster and chaos and mess, an impulse to change how people think. So we're not trying to change how people think by reasoning with them, by saying, here are the facts, here's what we conclude, and arguing the case. We're trying to work on their emotions.
Yep.
And create problems so that we get an emotional response and then get a particular direction. And we're not telling anyone what that direction is. That seems to be the governmental model now.
Yep, the simple talk is of change. You don't say change from what to what, you just use the word change. We're also hearing the word hope. We're going to hope for a better future. We're going to have change, but there's never any statement of what it is. Let's just follow up on Pickles, because he added a bit to his comments about Theresa May. He said, if you come to her in a reasonable way with a reasonable case, 9 times out of 10, she'll back you. Now, I think what he's actually saying here is if you want to get around Theresa May, who is a horrible woman, she makes decisions on the basis of merit. If you want to get round her, what you've got to do is come to her, be ultra reasonable, and she will then follow your policy. Now, is this man dangerous? I think he is, because let's remember another one of his quotes. He said this: we are going to shake up the balance of power in this country. We're going to change the nature of the Constitution, be in no doubt about our commitment to localism. I know I look like an unlikely revolutionary, but the revolution starts here. And what was this man talking about? Of course, he was talking about big society. Many people think David Cameron's big society has gone away. I think this is the stepping stone to national unity, which is what you've picked up on, Mike, of course. And it was the UK column that warned and warned that the Conservatives were subverting British society, families, the Constitution, common law, in order to get this new agenda in. It was cross-party. This was Tony Blair, we've shown this many times, saying that he had a vision of a new Britain, and central to the vision was the creation of a new class, a new elite, placed in positions of authority, who will propagate the new spirit of the age and spread the principles of the third way across Britain. These people, we'll go back to David. I think, David, these people are just simply telling us that they want to completely destroy everything we have known in this country, our views, values, society, law, in order to create their vision of the future. That vision, to me, does not seem to be a benevolent future at all.
And let us remember that the third way, when Tony Blair described it, and long before, the third way, which isn't communism and isn't capitalism, is of course called fascism, which is, you have the appearance of private property and individual freedom, but it's actually so heavily controlled by the state that you have no real freedom. That's the system. Hugely bureaucratic and very much against individual liberty and human thriving in the longer term. And we have a situation where none of the big problems are being addressed yet. I mean, it was a very strange election in many ways. Was anything really discussed?
No.
Was anything really addressed? If it was, I missed it. The nature of the problems we're facing weren't really looked at, and those are still sitting in the future. And we seem to be given a choice of either the country's going to be so chaotically disrupted with immigration, etc., and we now have bombs going off and all the rest of it, or martial law. We either have an unworkable country or martial law. Is that the choice that ultimately is going to be placed before the British people a couple of election cycles down the line?
Well, these are very good questions, and I think that is the choice, unless we take advantage of this period that we're just entering at the moment. So let's just have a look at what might be next. Well, we get a clue because John McDonnell has said that Labour is ready to form a minority government. Well, can they do that? Well, let's just have a look at what the process might be. So Theresa May is still Prime Minister. She remains Prime Minister unless she resigns, but she's not going to resign until a new government is formed, I don't think. The Tories have the largest number of votes, so they have the first attempt to form a government. Theresa May could form a minority government herself, but from what we've heard this morning, from her speech this morning, it sounds like she wants to try and encourage the Democratic Unionist Party to join her. They're saying that they don't need to enter into any kind of formal coalition agreement. They don't want to. I suspect perhaps they recognise what happened to the Liberal Democrats, who was the last party that attempted to form, that did go into coalition with the Tories, and what happened to them. But nonetheless, DUP saying not really necessary. So not quite sure where Theresa May stands at the moment. She could form a minority government. Jeremy Corbyn could form a minority government, as John McDonnell suggests. And as we've said, Tory DUP coalition is possible. Now, the Labour Party, David, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Labour Party have said that they would not enter, they said up before the election at least, that they would not enter into a coalition with the SNP, but I suppose it's possible. They could enter with a coalition with the Lib Dems and the Greens as well. I presume that would sort them out at the end of the day, but certainly they'd be a lot better off than they are at the moment. But perhaps the worrying aspect of this is that there's no particular time limit. There's no particular structure for how this process it continues. It might take 3 weeks. It might take 3 years. You just never know. The first kind of informal deadline is the 13th of June when Parliament sits once again. And the next informal deadline might be the 19th of June, which is the Queen's speech, where, of course, the new government is supposed to present its legislative agenda. That isn't really possible at the moment, so we have to wait and see. So let's see what might actually happen. Well, I suspect that what we're going to see in the coming weeks is an increase, more terrorist events, more of these types of things, shootings, bombings, stabbings, whatever it happens to be. We're going to increase the tension in this country. But it's not going to be limited to just Britain. I think we're going to see events across Europe because, of course, Brexit is a large part of this as well. I think you've hinted at this already, David. We're going to see the intensity of these events rise to a level where perhaps a government of national unity is justified. Perhaps we won't see a coalition between the Tories and the DUP. Maybe if Britain ends up in a almost state of emergency, perhaps Jeremy Corbyn might come in behind Theresa May and offer support, or whoever the Prime Minister happens to be. And all parties would end up working to a common purpose, Brian.
Absolutely, and we'll hear more of that in a minute, I believe.
Absolutely. And perhaps we might see Operation Temper re-invoked. So let's just see what Jeremy Corbyn said this morning. I'm only going to play a few seconds of this. This was his part of his presentation that he gave this morning.
While the Conservatives offer cuts and ran a campaign of fear, Labour is determined to invest in you and your family. We offer real hope. Under a Labour government, We will invest in our communities, our hospitals, our schools, our police and our emergency services. Labour has made gains in every region and nation of Britain. With your help, working together, unified behind a common purpose, we can win and we will win. And we'll build a country that works for the many, not the few.
So, Brian, I'm going to say that Jeremy Corbyn understands absolutely the implications of using that phrase.
Absolutely, without question. And of course, let's just remind viewers and listeners that common purpose was being driven at one stage from the office of the Deputy Prime Minister when Prescott was Deputy Prime Minister. So common purpose embedded in Labour at that stage.
So again, David, I think we need to reinforce this notion that, of course, we weren't suggesting at any point that a vote for Labour was a solution. We're buying time, but we're under no illusions that Labour is part, Jeremy Corbyn, a Fabian, this is part and parcel of the common purpose agenda here, David.
Very much so. Common purpose is inherently to do with deals behind the scenes, with controlling people in ways that they don't see, with hidden networks, and with a gradual changing of society to match a vision that's never really put forward with any clarity or any openness. And also added on to that, you have all of these references to investment, which is a government word, which means reckless spending of money which we will later tax from your children. So we have all of those issues as well. We are running a huge deficit for all the talk of austerity. We are still spending a great deal of money that we don't have. How long can that go on? It can't be sustained initially. It must come to an end. And when it comes to an end, it will come to an end extremely rapidly.
So, David, what are your thoughts on the possibility of a government of national unity?
Well, it must be more likely now because, okay, Theresa May says she will form a government that can lead the UK, quote, at a critical time, working with, quote, friends in the DUP. Right, so that's the latest that's come out. So that gives her a bare majority on votes of confidence, Queen's Speech and budget. Is that enough to run the country? You start putting pressure on that particular administration. The sort of pressure that's going to come on from Europe is going to be intense, let alone terrorism and civil strife and potentially martial law. Can that, if they want to call martial law or some form of martial law, and let's face it, Operation Tempora is kind of martial law.
It's getting there, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. That particular group, the Conservatives plus the DUP, would never carry it off. So if it's going to get serious, it's going to be a government of national unity, and that would be no opposition. You would have the government, and there would be functionally no opposition. So that's almost certain to come in if things really get difficult.
Let's just briefly, in a couple of minutes, talk a little bit about Brexit and Europe. Now, my opinion has been from the beginning that Brexit has been a fraud, a psyop. It isn't real, and my reasoning for that is because I believe the deal was done 2 years ago when David Cameron did his tour of Europe and came back and published his white paper, The Best of Both Worlds. And as I've said, the language out of Theresa May in the run-up to this election, since the Brexit vote and the run-up to this election, you actually look at what she's saying and compare it with that white paper, you find that you're pretty much in exactly the same place. So I've been skeptical about Brexit from the beginning. And of course, the elephant in the room, which nobody wants to talk about, is EU military unification. And that's absolutely moving on apace. We've just seen this week the European Commission publishing information about a unified budget for procurement and so on. So that continues to move on and not mentioned at any point during this election campaign. So Brexit is a fraud, in my opinion. But nonetheless, the perception within the media and so on over the next number of weeks and months is going to be contrary to how she would have liked, where the media might have been able to play this as being Theresa May in a position of strength and stability, shall we say, in Europe. Instead, Europe has the upper hand. So is this, how do you see this playing out, at least in the media narrative over the next several months?
Well, firstly, if I could comment on your Brexit skepticism, you make a good case for that, but it's getting a stronger case all the time as events unfold. That the cloudy, deceptive language that was being used, what did that really mean? No one knew. And you're pointing out the similarity to what David Cameron did. And as events unfold, your case for that's becoming ever stronger. In terms of the EU, well, the EU are going to play hardball now, because the EU will take a view, and we pay for so much of it. They have to make, if they possibly can, they have to make a mess of Britain leaving, as a warning to the others as much as anything else. But if possible, to hold on to the cash, because cash is king. So the EU will play hardball, because the EU calculation must be now that the British political system is incapable of delivering what the people voted for when they voted for Brexit. And with enough pressure, it'll fold. And who's to say they're wrong if that's their calculation? Because we have the situation where the people want to be, again, in a country of their own. The people don't like how the greater European agenda has been changing the country. But we don't have a political elite who are representing that view. We don't have a parliament that's representing that view. We had a parliament under Theresa May that was pretending to represent that view, even though they didn't agree with it. What do we have now? I really don't know. I don't see how that collection of politicians can go and negotiate a genuine exit from the EU. Where will they get the gumption to do that? Where will they get the strength of character? Where will they get the ideas and the determination that would be necessary to actually deliver?
There's a silence because we're now going into the heart of the problem, aren't we? What is going to happen next? We're into a chaotic, very confused situation. This is all good because the public have no idea what's going on. It's delay for Brexit. We've got rumours that Boris Johnson could be lined up as the next Prime Minister. Presumably, Theresa would just resign, he would just take over, so Boris would come in as an unelected Prime Minister. That's a pretty scary thought, but everything is smoke and mirrors at the moment, so I think we're going to have to continue to lift stones and analyse what's going on.
Yes, okay. Quick ad then, final ad, because the event is on Sunday, Media on Trial. It's Sunday the 11th of June, 7 p.m. in the Cheese and Grain in Frome. Patrick Henningsen, Vanessa Beeley, Peter Ford, Professor Piers Robinson, Robert Stewart, Professor Tim Hayward, all speaking on that subject. Looking forward to it. Hope to see as many people there as possible.
And of course, media, proper media, becoming ever more vital as we see the sheer propaganda coming out of BBC and others.
Absolutely. Right. Let's just finish on this one, I think. Right. Just complete change of subject then. David, Gilad has set up a new campaign, the Antifa campaign.
This is hilarious. And if you want some light relief and an example of the human spirit going the right direction, please seek this video out on YouTube. It is absolutely wonderful. This is Gilad responding to the Antifa attack on him. He's decided to join Antifa and no longer have any fa. So he's not going to play the note F ever again. He's saying no to fa, and it's a wonderful video. Please make a point in looking that one out.
Yes. So in order to understand that, we've got to realise that he's sitting in front of his piano.
He is. He's dressed and he's got his t-shirt in outside in, so it looks black on the outside. He has a red bandana and a rucksack, so he's really gone to town on looking Antifa, and yes, it gives you an idea of what he thinks of that particular form of the political spectrum.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, excellent.
We'll leave it there.
Well, we better just bring in Liar Liar, surely.
Oh yeah, well absolutely, go for
I
it.
think
Yes.
let's just move through a few. Why did we want to? Sorry, where are we? Here we are. Sorry, it's taken a bit of time to be there. But let's remember this Liar Liar video, Captain Ska, who produced a lot of response to Theresa May. And of course, wonderful music, very catchy. When you've heard it a couple of times, that music sticks in your head. This was one of the key shots. I really love this one, Theresa May and Boris. This is presumably the future Prime Minister of Britain, Boris Johnson. But Theresa was saying, we the Conservatives can build a better Britain, to which the refrain is liar, liar, of course. This was part of it, though. Broken Britain is not an accident. And of course, this is absolutely right. It's a planned event, and it's driven by the deep state and, of course, the criminal international bankers. So when we look at that video, and I think it's got over 2 million views now, the question that we have to ask is who funded it? And if you look at the People's Assembly, who've got their logo on that video, and you look at the list of tens and tens and tens of organisations that they say are working in partnership and helping to sponsor them, things get very interesting. We think the People's Assembly is actually part of George Soros's Open Society. I'm looking into this, so we can't say factually at the moment, but that's what we think. And therefore we can see that these very deep state powers with the bankers are actually manipulating everything that takes place in the election. And of course, some people saying that the swing that's taken place has partly been driven by young people, the universities and the unions. Absolutely correct. This was a quality engineered piece of propaganda to attack Theresa May. Who has paid for that propaganda video? That's the question we need to ask. And then I'm also going to say, people say, how do we see the people? How do we recognize the bad people? Don't look for parties. Don't look for generic labels. What we need to do is judge them by what they do and what they say. And when you've seen and heard what they do and say, then you can call them out using proper language. And how significant that in that video, of course, they used proper language. They didn't say Theresa May is a bit of a waffler. They said she was a liar. And this is one of the things that we must engage now. We must regain our language and describe these people as they really are. Having said that, it was a fun video. David, a few closing comments from you.
A couple of things. It's very interesting that the young people and university students have been central in the move against Theresa May and the Conservatives, because the education system has long been a form of indoctrination, and it's taken people a lot of years to overcome their own education. If you look at what's happening all across the Western world, particularly in Canada, if those of us who follow Jordan Peterson's fight to maintain free speech in Canadian universities, we've seen that many of the university courses and subject areas are completely dominated by the ideas of social justice, which have gone to such an extreme as to be simply bizarre and extremely toxic, postmodern ideas which are completely contrary to human thriving. And this is what is being indoctrinated into the children. We had a case which I'm looking to get some more information on this week, where in Scotland, where 3-year-old children at a nursery school were given a lesson on the London terror attacks. Without the knowledge of the parents, they came home, started talking about the London terror attacks. Where did you find that out? And it had been discussed in the nursery school. These kids are 3, right? These are subject matters at that age that the parents should be introducing into the children's lives when at an appropriate age and appropriate time, not the schools without any consultation. So we're seeing strange things are happening to our children, and this is changing how people think. Ultimately, it's a battle of ideas. The disappointing thing about the election that we've just gone through is the dearth of ideas. We've got the nostalgia for the ideas of the 1970s on the side of the Labour versus no ideas at all on the side of the Conservatives, which has been the remarkable thing about the election. And nostalgia has beaten nothing, which is not entirely surprising. We've gone through the point where the SNP in Scotland have been revealed to have also no real ideas about how to run a country, and they're being found out. Nicola Sturgeon, incidentally, I was hearing that 10 to 15 was going to be the magic number for a leadership challenge on Nicola Sturgeon. Now, she lost 21 seats, so watch that one quite carefully. So what we're going to need in the months and years to come is a proper discussion of the ideas and the direction the country is going to go in, and it's going to have to be a discussion that's going to be led by people out with the political realm. It has to be, because the politicians are simply not capable of having that mature discussion with the people. They're so busy trying to nudge us and control us that honesty is falling by the wayside.
David, thank you very much. Excellent summary. Well, we're going to end on this day by saying that we think this is the start. We are not downhearted. We have bought time. This election has bought the country time. Can we do something about it? Yes, we can. We just need to get many more people activated and understanding what is really going on. We need to break them out of party politics. So have a good weekend. We'll be back on Monday, and really the battle starts then to get the real news out to people about what is happening across the Lib Lab Con. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.